This is Climate Change is a 2018 VR docuseries created by Dan Funk Dennis and Eric Strauss. Since its premiere at Tribeca, it's received quite a lot of media attention for its ability to engage audiences and communicate the urgency of our impact on the climate. Today, I'm going to review all 4 parts of the series, that's Melting Ice, Fire, Feast, and Famine, to try to discover just what makes this series so immersive. Melting Ice takes us to Greenland, where we witness immense glaciers breaking apart and melting away. And this film is just gorgeous. The color palette is kept very simple. White, deep blue, bright blue, and then just that beautiful red highlight. It's almost Kubrick-esque. One of the techniques that Melting Ice uses is really long shot durations, 30 seconds or more, which makes me feel safe to look around the scene and explore without fear of missing out on anything. It really increases my sense of agency in an environment when I can feel free to look around without having my attention sort of forced in one particular direction. I often talk about scale being particularly engaging in VR, where you can change the size of the viewer, making them larger or smaller than they actually are in real life. But in Melting Ice, we get a different sense of scale. It's a more natural scale, being right up close to these giant glacier cliffs and watching them crumble right before us. The 3D spatial audio added a lot to the immersion, being able to turn your head and hear the rushing river in this ear or the other. The voiceover work, though, it sounded muddy, like it was a bad audio recording. One of the challenges of this media is introducing movement into your shots, because 360 film really needs to be smooth and stable. So typically this is achieved with using drones or sometimes attaching cameras to vehicles. And my favorite portion of this film was shot using a boat. Attaching the camera to a boat and having that move alongside the glaciers was really effective. Technically speaking, there was not a stitch in sight. The object removal was flawless. Just the occasional drop of water on the camera, which is a little unavoidable in the sort of circumstances that were filmed here. Just a couple things to be careful of here. One is objects moving too fast. For example, birds flying in the sky can sometimes be too fast for the camera's refresh rate and they'll be doubled up. Or placing objects too close to the camera is another thing, where anything in that 30 centimeter safe zone can really cause eye strain when you try to look at it and can cause image decoupling, which really breaks immersion. In Fire, we're taken to California, where we see firefighters battling an increasing amount of forest fires and grappling with their aftermath. One of the things that I just love about this film is that it takes us to dangerous places that we wouldn't normally be able to see, to witness events that are only going to happen once, like a house burning down. And some of my favorite shots are the ones where there's a person standing directly in front of you and having a conversation with you, not with the camera, but with the viewer. There were a lot of handheld camera shots in this movie, which really doesn't work in VR. It made me feel a little nauseous. And then there were lots of helicopter scenes, maybe too many. When the camera's inside the cockpit, it's really fantastic, but it suffers from objects being too close around you. The best helicopter scenes are when the camera is placed underneath the helicopter and you're able to look down on the forests below. There was one stunning drone shot that really stood out for me. And I wonder if it was stock footage or something, because it was the only drone shot in the film. I would have loved it if there was less helicopter and more drone. There were quite a few obvious stitching errors, but what can you do when you're trying to stitch a forest canopy? That's got to be one of the most difficult things that you can stitch, so it's hard to fault the film for that. But the pacing of this documentary just dragged a little. The narrative was rambly, there was lots of filler shots. If the story could have been told in a more condensed way, it would have given the message much more urgency. There was also an over-reliance on voiceover work, which can really break presence if not done carefully. The best part of the story was when there was a man standing in front of you and saying, "Over there is where my wife grew up, and now it's burned down," and he's pointing and you want to turn around. I would have loved if there was more storytelling using those sorts of techniques. My first reaction is, wow, I'm stunned. I had no idea. Feast takes us to the Amazon, where we witness deforestation in action, the purpose of which is to create fields to grow soy, to feed cattle, to feed a growing demand for beef. And the film eventually leads us to a Brazilian abattoir. Feast knows how to tell a story. It's a documentary with a very clear beginning, middle and end, and it drives home its message in a way that Fire seemed unable to get to the point on. Feast learns from some of the mistakes of Fire. There's no voiceover, and we get lots of shots up close with people, Amazon loggers and abattoir workers, and animals too, with the cattle and even a leopard. There's some stunning drone footage. I'm a huge fan of marrying drones and VR together. Feast understands that drones can take us places that we can't normally go, and it can play with things like scale and distance. What really stands out for me is this feeling of being in a dangerous situation, up close with the leopard or in the middle of a moving herd of cattle, right by a tree as it's falling and wondering, am I going to be hit? We see a lot more camera mounted on vehicle scenes. Again, the boat angle is really special, but we also get tractors and other machinery. There's still a little bit of handheld camera footage, but it's really minimized here. All of these lessons combine to make Feast the most impressive and impactful VR documentary I've ever seen. Famine is incredibly saddening. It's set in Somalia and explores the lack of food and water after years of drought. There are images of malnourished children that are going to be stuck in my head. I had to look away at some points. It seems like Famine was shot after Fire, but before Melting Ice. There's some much better progression to the storyline and narrative, and there's shots of the camels, the men, women, and children that are engaging and heartbreaking. As impactful as its message is, Famine still has a few lessons to learn when it comes to the technicalities. Like in some of the other shorts, there were quite a few times when people and things were placed too close to the camera and it made it hard for them to come into focus. The colors in Famine are all washed out, sometimes seeming intentionally desaturated, and this may have been a decision to help communicate the dusty, barren nature of the Somalian desert, but it also made the film a little dull, especially when you compare it to the bright ice blues and fire reds and forest greens of the previous films. Again, too many handheld walking camera shots. These really don't work in VR. They're presence-breaking and they made me feel nauseous. Over-reliance on voiceover is also quite presence-breaking. I'd much rather listen to someone speaking with me with the context of what they're saying being played out around us than have to hear about things through a voice in my head. What Dan Fong Dennis and Eric Strauss have put together is an incredible feat, telling such an important story from four corners of the globe. If you only watch one, Feast is my recommendation, and Fire seems to be the least cohesive of the four. This docuseries left a major impact on me, and I'm committing to being part of the solution. You can too, by clicking on the link below. If you're enjoying or learning from these VR film reviews, then please like and subscribe. I'm going to continue to produce 1 to 2 per week. So that's it from me. Thanks for watching and see you next time.